The tree line east of Crinkelt stands dark against falling snow. A rifleman occupies a secondary foxhole at the edge of a narrow forested defile. He wears standard American field gear, but the rifle resting across the forward lip of his position is not standard issue. It is an M1903 Springfield fitted with a telescopic sight, purchased through a mail-order sporting catalogue before deployment. The men around him have called it unnecessary. Some have called it worse. He has said nothing in response. He has simply kept the scope clean and the rifle bore dry. The defile below him is one of two viable armored approach routes through this wooded sector of the Belgian Ardennes. His assignment is routine overwatch. The sector has been quiet for weeks. Command considers this part of the front secondary priority. The weather alone, they reason, should suppress major movement. At 0835, artillery impacts are already arriving with a regularity that does not feel like harassing fire. But the sound alone does not clarify what the rifleman begins to see through his optic at ranges beyond what iron sights could resolve. Deeper in the timber, something is moving. Not one thing. Many things. Moving together. The instability signal is not audible. It is visual. Too many synchronized displacements for a patrol. Too regular for random scatter. Something is forming beyond the tree line, and he is the only man on this section of the American line who can see it clearly. Vernon McGarity commands elements of Company L, 393rd Infantry Regiment, 99th Infantry Division, in positions nearby. His platoon has already logged unusually heavy incoming artillery. The logging is routine. The response is not yet emergency posture. The 99th Infantry Division holds extended frontage along a sector assessed as low risk. Intelligence reaching forward commands in these final days before December 16th suggested that German fuel shortages make sustained armored thrusts logistically impractical. That assessment, processed by men reading reports in warm buildings, now governs the defensive posture of soldiers sitting in snow-filled foxholes. The foxholes are thinly spaced. The arcs of fire are designed to interlock, but only in theory. In practice, manpower shortages mean each position covers more ground than it should. The terrain is working for the defenders in one sense. The forested corridors channel movement. A major armored advance has only a few viable paths. The defile the rifleman covers is one of them. At 0842, the movement in the timber deepens. The helmets visible through the scope are not scattered. They are appearing at timed intervals, one cluster behind another, moving with the coordinated patience of units following a prepared timetable. The rifleman watches. He does not yet fire. By 0847, German artillery shifts its pattern. This is the first major constraint to emerge. The dispersion of incoming rounds is no longer random. Shells are clustering along known defensive nodes, positions that would appear on any pre-mapped fire plan. This is registration fire, not harassment. The artillery is clearing corridors. The field telephone wire connecting forward foxholes to battalion command is severed at 0848. Reports must now move by runner or by radio, and radio reception in this terrain is broken by hills and tree density. The communication redundancy the American defensive plan relied upon collapses in under 2 minutes. The decision-making cycle shrinks immediately. Any request for fire support, any attempt to relay what the rifleman is seeing through his scope, must now travel slower than the attack forming in front of him. At 0853, he has confirmation. Through the magnified glass, the movement resolves into columnar infantry, company strength at minimum, advancing in bounding intervals timed to the artillery pauses. White camouflage smocks, automatic weapons visible in the forward rows at densities that exclude reconnaissance as a possibility. These are assault elements. They are moving with the assured timing of men who know where the American lines are and what they are expected to achieve in the next hour. The German formation belongs to elements of the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, one of the spearhead formations assigned to penetrate the Ardennes front as part of a strategic winter offensive that began before dawn on December 16th. The operation is a calculated gamble at the highest level of German command. The objective is a thrust through the Ardennes to reach Antwerp, splitting the Allied line in two. Everything depends on speed. The armored columns must move before Allied air power can respond, before fuel runs out, before American reinforcements can close the gaps. The 99th Infantry Division was chosen as a target precisely because American command considered it a quiet sector. That assessment is now irrelevant. What was theoretical yesterday is physical and immediate this morning. The rifleman at the defile has no way to know the full scope of what has already begun across 80 miles of front. He has a rifle, a telescopic sight, a finite supply of .30-06 ammunition, and a clear line of fire into a corridor that the German assault must use. He begins to fire at 0855. The first targets are not random. Through the scope, squad leaders and section commanders are identifiable at ranges beyond iron sight clarity. They carry map cases. They gesture. They position themselves at the sides of their formations to direct movement. The rifleman has learned to read these indicators. A man pointing at ground while others crouch and shift is a man giving orders, and a man giving orders is a priority target. The German infantry depends on those men to maintain timing. Remove them and the coordination begins to degrade. The first casualties fall in the forward elements. For the soldiers deeper in the formation, the sound of rifle fire arrives before they can locate its source. The range and the scope make the rifleman's position invisible to anyone relying on standard optics. The snow falling between the tree line and the foxhole diffuses the muzzle signature further. By 0901, armored silhouettes are visible deeper in the timber. The snow obscures hull markings, but the outlines are recognizable to anyone who has spent time studying vehicle identification. Panzer IV, possibly Panther class. They are holding position behind the infantry screen. This is the mechanical structure of the assault. Infantry must secure the approach, clear suppressive firing points, confirm the corridor is passable before armor commits. The tanks are waiting for the infantry to do their work. If the infantry falters, the armor waits. The defile is not an incidental route. It is a primary thrust lane. The German planning has designated it as an armored access corridor. Everything moving in the timber to the east is pointed at this narrow gap in the Belgian forest. McGarrity's position is receiving similar artillery pressure. Reports reaching the few radio sets still functioning describe heavy contact developing at multiple points along the 99th Division's front. But confirmation of armor presence is uneven. Neighboring positions lack the optical clarity to distinguish silhouettes at depth. The rifleman covers a corridor that others cannot fully observe. His optic, the one they called unnecessary affectation, one is now the only instrument on this stretch of line that can see what is coming. At 0901, a second constraint materializes. The thin defensive spacing, calculated for probing attacks and local incursions, was never intended to absorb simultaneous pressure at multiple points. The frontage each position covers is already beyond what doctrine recommends. If German forces identify and exploit a single gap, lateral movement behind the American line becomes possible. The geometry that command trusted 3 days ago is no longer working in their favor. Between 0908 and 0915, the rifleman continues targeted fire. German infantry advance in bounding overwatch, one section moving while another holds ground and provides cover. In each cycle, the section leader signals the next bound. The rifleman targets those signals. 3 squad leaders fall in the forward company within the first 12 minutes of engagement. The effect is visible through the scope. Hesitation spreads forward from the casualties outward, not because soldiers lose courage, but because the coordination mechanism breaks down. Men trained to wait for an order wait, and the order does not come. At 09:15, German machine gun teams deploy suppressive fire towards suspected American positions. The rifleman's foxhole is not yet precisely located. The suppressive fire is oriented toward general front, not toward his specific position. The optic has given him something rare in this kind of fighting: the ability to engage at ranges where the return fire, guided by muzzle flash and sound, falls wide. But the suppressive fire is the beginning of a triangulation effort. The German infantry is not withdrawing. It is adjusting. Section elements begin lateral movement, spreading to wider intervals, attempting to fix the source of the disruption. This is disciplined infantry behavior. The assault is adapting. The third constraint becomes visible at 09:18. Ammunition is a finite variable, and it has been finite since before the first shot. The rifleman carries his standard allocation of .30-06 rounds, plus additional magazines gathered before the morning's opening artillery. Resupply is not possible. The ground between foxholes is under continuous artillery dispersion. Runners attempting to move ammunition forward would cross open terrain under direct artillery targeting. The number of rounds remaining in this position is now the ceiling on how long the disruption can continue. In snow accumulation on the rifle barrel affects heat dissipation. At 09:21, wind shift from the north increases lateral drift at extended ranges. The rifleman adjusts elevation and windage. Each adjustment costs time. Each shot fired costs ammunition. The two curves are moving toward an intersection point. At 09:27, a fourth constraint appears in the form of German infantry lateral dispersion. The assault formation has spread its front. Instead of a concentrated column, the approaching infantry now presents a wider engagement arc. This spreads the problem. The rifleman can address one section, but the flanking sections continue to advance while he is engaged. The effective reach of a single rifleman, however precisely equipped, has a geographic limit. The Magarity's platoon at 09:27 receives word through a runner. Flanking movement is being reported to the south. This information arrives without clarity about scale or speed. The sector picture is assembling from fragments. Nobody at platoon level or company level has the full shape of what is happening across the divisional front. Cross-cutting to German company-level command at the tree line edge. The regrouping effort underway at 09:27 is not a retreat. It is a reorganization. The casualties absorbed in the first 20 minutes have delayed the assault but have not broken it. German section commanders are consolidating the remaining elements of forward squads into a concentrated push. The assault timetable built into the operational plan is slipping locally. The timeline for the full Ardennes offensive requires multiple sectors to achieve breakthrough before Allied reserves can be committed. Every minute of delay at a primary thrust lane is a minute that compounds elsewhere. The sixth constraint registers at 09:30. German assault timing depends structurally on synchronized coordination between infantry and armor. The infantry screen must clear the approach before tanks commit. Tanks moving through a corridor still held by functional American defensive fire risk anti-tank weapons, mines, or simple immobilization under infantry close assault. The armor has been stationary since 09:01. Its engines are running. The fuel is burning. The men inside are waiting for a signal that has not yet come because the infantry coordination has not been restored. The mechanical vulnerability is precise. Coordination dependency. The armor cannot move without the infantry. The infantry cannot move with confidence under precision fire. One disrupted variable freezes the entire system at this point in the defile. At 09:34, the German formation attempts something different. A mortar section deploys at the tree line rear edge and begins firing registered adjustments toward the American foxhole positions. Mortar fire is area effective. It does not require a precise target fix. The rounds walk inward toward the suspected firing point, each impact closer than the last. The rifleman's foxhole is partially concealed by a fallen timber structure and accumulated snow. But concealment is not cover. When mortar rounds begin closing distance, concealment means nothing against fragmentation. The fifth major constraint is now environmental. The barrel of the rifle, fired repeatedly in freezing air, generates enough heat that snow touching the forward portion of the stock and barrel melts. The resulting steam plume is visible. It is a position indicator. The rifleman is aware of this. He shifts position slightly within the foxhole, pressing against the forward wall to reduce the plume angle. But visibility is narrowing on both sides. His position is not yet confirmed, but the mortar adjustment pattern suggests the German observers are working toward it methodically. At 0942, through the scope, the rifleman observes something that changes the calculus of the entire morning. At the tree line edge, a regrouping effort is underway at a scale that exceeds what the first wave casualties had obscured. The formation assembling is not a second company. It is the consolidation of battalion strength elements that had been staged deeper in the timber since before the engagement began. The full force behind the initial assault wave has been holding position, waiting for the forward company to fix American defensive positions and enable a concentrated follow-on push. The number of men assembling under the tree line is too large for the American defensive geometry to absorb. The spacing of foxholes along this approach, thin before this morning began, is structurally incapable of engaging battalion strength movement across a wide front with a single prepared defensive line. McGarrity's platoon reports at the same moment through runner communication that flanking movement to the west has been confirmed. German infantry elements are bypassing fixed defensive positions on the flanks. This is not a localized thrust. This is a primary sector assault. The fatal realization is not a single sensation. It is a calculation with no good result. The enemy force in this sector is not a patrol, not a company-scale probe, not a localized push that a prepared defensive line can contain. It is a coordinated battalion-level assault with armored follow-on, moving on a timeline integrated into a division-wide, then army-wide offensive that began before dawn the previous day. The American defensive frontage along this sector was calculated for a threat that has not materialized in a sector that was not supposed to require defending at this scale. Precision fire has disrupted the timing. Squad leaders are dead. The first wave assault has been delayed. But the delay is measured in minutes, not hours, and the force assembling now at the tree line has enough mass to move through this corridor regardless of what any single defensive position can inflict. Continued fire from this position no longer holds the objective of stopping the assault. It shifts to the only achievable objective remaining: buying time. Every minute the German armor stays behind the tree line is a minute that does not yet belong to the enemy. Every minute delayed here is a minute available to American forces somewhere further west to move, to prepare, to occupy new ground. The rifleman continues firing. At 0950, German flanking infantry reports reach McGarrity's position through fragmented runner communication. The lateral movement westward means that within a measurable time, the American platoon positions risk isolation. Withdrawal requires crossing terrain now under direct German observation and suppressive fire coverage. The corridor that was available for movement at 0900 is narrowing with each passing minute as German infantry extends its lateral reach. Mortar rounds at 0952 begin their closest impacts yet. One detonation impacts 4 meters from the foxhole's right wall. The force of it collapses a section of the forward dirt embankment, exposing the rifleman's right flank. Snow and soil fill the lower portion of the foxhole. The structural integrity of the position is degraded. Concealment from the front remains partial. but the foxhole no longer provides full cover on the right side. The rifleman clears debris from the bolt mechanism with his hands. The scope remains intact. He fires again. Across the sector, other American positions are absorbing the same pressure. Foxholes that held 2 or 3 men are taking mortar impact, small arms fire, and artillery dispersion simultaneously. Communication between positions depends on physical visibility or runner movement, both of which are compromised by smoke, falling snow, and suppressive fire arcs. At 0958, battalion-level command is attempting to assess penetration depth with incomplete information. The field telephone network is severed across most of the forward positions. Radio traffic is fragmented and partially jammed by German electronic interference. The picture available to regimental headquarters at this hour is a mosaic of reports that do not yet add up to a coherent frontline map. Individual position reports describe heavy contact. But the shape of the German assault, the sector-wide pattern of simultaneous pressure across multiple points, is not yet visible in the information that has successfully transmitted backward. The decision to commit reserves, to shift artillery, to order systematic withdrawal, requires information that cannot travel through severed wire and failing radio. The men in the foxholes are fighting alone in the operational sense. They can see what is in front of them. They cannot see the whole front, and nobody behind them can see what they see. At 1001, the barrel heat affecting the rifleman's M1903 Springfield reaches a threshold that begins to affect shot consistency. The long series of rapid precision shots has elevated the barrel temperature beyond the range where standard .30-06 ammunition performs predictably. The thermal expansion changes the internal geometry of the barrel by a fraction. But at the ranges being engaged, fractions matter. The rifleman shortens his firing intervals, allowing partial cooling between shots. This reduces his rate of output. 2 American soldiers in a foxhole 40 meters to the rifleman's left are the next micro-engagement the morning produces. They have been providing flanking fire coverage along the secondary arc of the D-file. At approximately 10:05, a German light machine gun team identifies their muzzle position through smoke observation and locks suppressive fire onto their location. Both men are pinned. Their ability to cover the southern edge of the D-file, the edge most exposed to the lateral German movement, is eliminated. The defensive arc on that side of the corridor goes dark. The German infantry moving laterally to the south immediately advances through the gap. McGarrity's platoon at 1008 receives partial withdrawal authorization through a runner who reached the position after covering ground under artillery fire. The order is not comprehensive. It covers specific elements of the platoon, not all positions. Men who receive the order begin to move. Men who do not receive the order continue to hold. The rifleman does not receive the withdrawal order at 10:08. He continues firing. At 10:12, the mortar fire on his position intensifies again. The German observers have achieved a narrower fix on the firing location through the accumulated observations of infantry elements who have been watching his sector since before 0900. The steam plume from the barrel, the sound signature of repeated shots from a single position, and the pattern of German casualties concentrated along a specific engagement corridor all point to an approximate source. The mortar section does not need a precise fix. It needs a 40-meter circle, and by 10:12, it has one. 2 rounds impact the forward left quadrant of the foxhole in rapid succession. The soil wall on the forward face partially collapses inward. The rifleman is not struck by fragmentation, but the position is now structurally compromised on 2 sides. Snow has filled the lower portion of the foxhole to knee depth. He fires. The number of rounds remaining is single-digit. At 1015, a 6th constraint becomes operational. The German infantry elements that moved laterally to the south have cleared the secondary American firing position on the defile's flank. Nothing is now covering the southern approach to the corridor. The armored elements in the timber behind the German infantry have a partially cleared approach lane. The infantry triangulation of the primary sniper position in the foxhole is nearly complete. The mortar section is firing for effect. At 1018, the sound of armored engines changes character. Tank engines at idle have a specific acoustic signature. Tank engines increasing throttle for movement have another. The sound reaching the D-file from the eastern timber is the second kind. The Panzer and Panther-class vehicles that have been stationary since before 0900 are now moving. The infantry has done sufficient work. The approach corridor has been suppressed to the threshold the German tankers require. The armor is committing. The rifleman fires his final rounds into the regrouping infantry, still visible at the tree line. He then relocates, or moving low along the collapsed foxhole wall toward a secondary position 15 meters to the rear. The primary position is no longer defensible. The relocation takes under 40 seconds and crosses an exposed section of ground. Mortar rounds continue to impact the area. He reaches the secondary position. Through the scope, the trees on the eastern edge of the defile begin to move. Not the trees themselves, but the shapes between them. The first German armored vehicle enters the defile at 1018. It moves at deliberate speed, infantry walking alongside and forward, weapons ready. The machine gun teams that were suppressing American firing positions shift to escort configuration. The column entering the defile is organized, purposeful, and large. At 10:22, American radio traffic at regimental level registers the first confirmed reports of armored penetration in multiple sectors simultaneously. The 99th Division is not facing a local thrust. It is facing coordinated breakthrough attempts at several points along its extended front. The information arriving at regiment is fragmentary, but consistent in one respect. German armor has breached, or is actively breaching, multiple approach routes. The withdrawal orders being issued from battalion and regiment are incomplete, because the information reaching headquarters is incomplete. Some orders arrive at platoon level, others do not arrive at all. Individual platoon leaders and squad leaders are making their own assessments based on what they can physically see. McGarrity's elements begin withdrawal under fire at approximately 10:25. The withdrawal crosses ground under German observation. Movement is covered by the fire of soldiers holding rearward positions, and the cost of that crossing is absorbed in the men who hold those positions while others move. The collapse of this sector is not explosive. It is sequential. One position becomes untenable. The defenders relocate or withdraw. The position behind it is now exposed on a flank it was not covering. That position becomes untenable. The sequence moves westward with the German armored advance. By 10:32, German armored elements have committed fully to the defile. The American platoon positions in this sector are untenable or abandoned. Some men have withdrawn in organized fashion, covered by rear elements. Others have been cut off by the lateral German infantry movement and have no clear withdrawal route. The sniper survives. He moves westward through broken terrain with other survivors of the forward positions. The sector behind him is in German hands. The broader picture of December 17, 1944, is assembling through the morning and into the afternoon in increments that no single American soldier can see whole. The German offensive initiated before dawn on December 16th, the true opening of what will be called the Battle of the Bulge, has achieved tactical surprise across a front of approximately 80 miles. The 99th Infantry Division is one of the American formations directly in the path of the German main effort. Its casualties in the opening 48 hours will be severe. Thousands of men will be killed, wounded, or captured in the initial penetration. But the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, and other German formations advance westward through gaps torn in the American line. Reports flowing back to American Corps and Army Command through the afternoon of December 17th are fragmentary, and in some cases, contradictory. The scale of what is happening is not immediately understood at higher command levels. The assumption that the Ardennes was a quiet sector dies slowly, in direct proportion to the arrival of confirmed reports. The myth that grows around engagements like the one in the defile east of Krinkelt is predictable and understandable. A single rifleman, armed with an optic that his own side mocked, held a German assault at bay for nearly 90 minutes. The story, passed through survivors and retold in post-war accounts, acquires embellishment, a single-handed annihilation of entire SS battalions, dozens of kills measured in the hundreds, a lone marksman who stopped the Ardennes offensive in one corridor. The documented record is different. German after-action reports and American after-action summaries confirm that localized sniper fire at multiple points along the 99th Division's front inflicted measurable German casualties and disrupted assault timing. The disruptions were real. The delays were quantifiable. Precision fire targeting German squad and section leaders degraded coordination between infantry and armor at specific approach corridors during the critical opening hours when the German timetable required speed. But no lone rifleman annihilated a battalion. The German casualties in the defile corridor were significant for a single defensive node. Do estimates place the number of German soldiers killed or wounded in that specific engagement corridor during the morning of December 17th in the range of several dozen. That number is tactically meaningful, but does not constitute battalion annihilation in any documented sense. What it constitutes is delay, and delay in the Ardennes offensive was a currency with enormous strategic value. The German operational plan was built on a timeline. Breakthrough had to happen fast because fuel reserves were limited. Allied air power would return when weather cleared, and American reinforcements were always going to arrive eventually. Every hour of delay at a primary approach corridor was an hour the German armored columns did not have. Every local disruption compounded with every other local disruption across the front. At the divisional level, with the 99th Infantry Division's resistance in the opening days, including the costly fighting at twin villages of Rocherath-Krinkelt, contributed to slowing the German advance enough to allow elements of the 2nd Infantry Division and eventually the 82nd Airborne and 101st Airborne to reach critical road junctions. The defense of Bastogne, which would become the defining image of American resistance in the Bulge, was made possible in part by the friction created in the opening hours along the 99th Division's front. None of that strategic significance was visible to the rifleman in the defile on the morning of December 17th. He could see 200 meters into the timber through a glass that his comrades had called unnecessary. He could identify a squad leader at ranges that iron sights could not resolve. He could count the rhythms of a German assault and target its communication nodes. That was the entirety of his operational view. The mail-order telescopic sight did not change the outcome of the Battle of the Bulge. The German offensive achieved its initial penetration. American lines broke across multiple sectors. Thousands of American soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured in the opening phase. The losses were real and severe. What the sight changed was the texture of a single morning in a single corridor. It added 90 minutes of friction to a German assault timetable that was already operating under resource constraints. It forced battalion-strength infantry to spend time regrouping that they did not have budgeted in their schedule. It held Panzer and Panther tanks stationary in a tree line while their engines burned fuel that was already finite and irreplaceable. The 7th constraint, which operated at the operational level rather than the tactical level, was fuel. German armored formations entering the Ardennes offensive carried enough fuel for the initial thrust, but relied on capturing Allied fuel depots to sustain the advance. When those depots were denied, either by demolition or by the simple fact of the German advance not moving fast enough to reach them, the arithmetic of the offensive changed. Armored columns that arrived late at fuel objectives found them destroyed or depleted. The minutes accumulated through localized delays across dozens of sectors were not individually decisive, but their sum was. By early January 1945, the German Ardennes offensive had stalled. Allied air power returned as weather cleared after Christmas. American reinforcements, including Patton's Third Army driving north to relieve Bastogne, changed the operational equation. German armored formations that had burned their fuel in the initial push lacked the capacity to sustain momentum or to withdraw in good order. The bulge in the Allied line that gave the battle its name was compressed from both sides through January. The Wehrmacht's ability to mount a comparable counter-offensive on the Western Front was gone. The men, the tanks, the fuel, and the tactical surprise invested in the Ardennes gamble had been expended. What had existed in December 1944 as a calculated strategic risk became, by February 1945, an irreversible operational deficit. German forces in the West were reduced to fighting delay actions in front of Allied armies that would reach the Rhine in March. Vernon McGarity survived the opening days of the Bulge and the engagements that followed. His actions during the fighting in the Rocherath-Krinkelt sector were recognized through official commendation. The men of the 393rd Infantry Regiment, 99th Infantry Division, who held and fought and fell in those opening hours, absorbed the initial weight of one of the largest German offensive operations of the European War. The rifleman who occupied the secondary foxhole overlooking the defile east of Krinkelt on the morning of December 17th is not the subject of a confirmed single-source individual account. His engagement exists in the composite of after-action reports, survivor testimony, FU and German operational logs that describe the friction encountered at specific approach corridors during the assault's opening hours. He is, in the documentary record, a presence confirmed by its effects rather than its name. The German casualties in his sector, the delayed armor commitment, the disrupted assault timing that bought minutes, that bought hours, that bought the organizational capacity for American resistance to consolidate. The mail-order optic came from a sporting catalogue. It was designed for hunting. It was mocked by soldiers who had been trained to use iron sights and who saw no tactical reason for a private purchase. In the specific conditions of a forested Belgian defile on a snowing December morning, it provided one American soldier with the ability to see past the range of standard military equipment and to engage targets whose deaths cascaded through the coordination structure of a battalion-strength assault. The sight did not stop the assault. The assault succeeded. The sector fell. The defile was taken. The armor moved through, but it moved through 90 minutes after it was supposed to, on a battlefield where 90 minutes was the difference between a German armored column reaching its first-day objective and failing to reach it. And the first-day objective, across the full Ardennes front, was never reached. The offensive that was supposed to reach Antwerp stalled at the Meuse. The gamble failed. The mocked optic and the rifleman who carried it did not decide that outcome. But they were part of the mechanical system of delays, fin constraints, and friction points that accumulated across the front and denied the German operational timeline the speed it required to succeed. When the timeline failed, the offensive failed. When the offensive failed, the Wehrmacht's last strategic reserve on the Western Front was gone. That is what happened in the timber east of Krinkelt on December 17, 1944. Not a legend, not a slaughter. A mechanical delay, imposed by a single rifleman with a mail-order scope against a battalion-strength assault in a narrow Belgian corridor on the first morning of the last German offensive the Western Allied armies would ever face. The door did not close that morning on German ambitions because one man held it. It closed because enough men, at enough points along a broken and thinly held front, or held it long enough for the weight on the other side to exhaust itself. The sniper's role was one pressure point among many, In the accounting of how an 80-mile German breakthrough became a failed offensive, it belongs in that ledger. Not mythic, not inflated, present, documented and consequential. That is enough.